Hello and welcome to the Audiovisual Cultures podcast. I'm your host, Paula Blair. Thank you for finding us, downloading and listening. This week continues post-screening discussions with Shail about the films of Sofia Coppola, and this time we watched The Beguiled. So this was recorded the night after we watched Lost in Translation in the previous episodes. Before settling into that discussion, just a reminder that you can get in touch with us via email on audiovisualcultures@gmail.com with any queries, or if you'd like to be a guest speaker at some point. This is a platform that is reaching out if you're a researcher, an academic, or you're an interested party in any way in anything to do with audiovisual cultures. Regardless of your fields, get in touch and we'll see what we can set up. At the time of recording, I'm still designing the Audiovisual Cultures website. It's coming along, but I'm working freelance, so it's taking a lot of time. The website hasn't launched yet, and it hasn't got a domain. If you want to help me get it set up and get it running, please consider pledging a monthly subscription via patreon.com/PEA Blair. And on that site, you can also access the videos that I've been making, blog posts, and video transcriptions that I make as well. All of this is building towards populating the website, and the website aims to facilitate accessible, inclusive, lifelong learning of arts and humanities subjects, amounting to what we might consider as audiovisual cultures. I really hope you enjoy the discussion. I hope you can help. If all you can do is just share this information, that is a massive help in itself. So I really hope you enjoy this, and I hope it's useful for you. So this is me and Shail talking about Sofia Coppola's The Beguiled. So who was The Beguiled?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure that out.
Are you trying to get the internet to tell you who The Beguiled was?
Well, there's a bit of a pattern is emerging, it seems, in that Coppola wants to portray situations in which if anyone's culpable, it's more than one person, and it's both a man and at least one man and one woman. So Elle Fanning was the really tall one then.
Yeah, she was the eldest of the children, I think.
Born in 1998. She's of German, Irish, English, French and Channel Islander descent.
Well, good on her.
It's a lot of descent.
Well, a lot of descent.
So she's the younger sister of Dakota Fanning, which is why she looks like Dakota Fanning, and she plays the younger version of Dakota's characters in various films. She was also Winnie Portly Rind in The Box Trolls, who's the main girl character.
I love Box Trolls. I need to see it again.
We'll do one for that. Right, so unorthodox in the sense of just having a main male protagonist who suddenly turns bad and then is just rather straightforwardly killed by the main female protagonists. But, yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Right, so we're doing a Sofia Coppola thing at the moment, and we watched Lost in Translation yesterday, which was released in 2003, and this is The Beguiled, which was released in 2017, and has only really just recently appeared on DVD. And we don't want to go, hey, Coppola, she's defined entirely by the fact that she makes pastel movies, but even in what I gather are her less pastel movies, in that, like, apparently Marie Antoinette is just a festival of pink, right?
Yeah.
And The Bling Ring is also, it's slightly neon as well, apparently, but mainly pastel.
Well, we need to watch them.
Yeah, so anyway, I gather that these are the less pastel of her films. But nonetheless, what she does in both of these is that she does like desaturated colours and plenty of colours with a lot of white in, so that when you desaturate them, you're making pastels. Because the thing about pastels is that we associate it with certain shades, right? But actually, pastels are just lots of white and then a little bit of colour. That's what makes it pastel. But of course, in addition to this, just like in Lost in Translation, alongside the relatively desaturated, quite whitish colours, masses of black. Every frame with looming black masses packed into it. And this one, in addition to all of that, quite low contrast, because there was points in this where I kept moving around going, am I just looking at the screen from the wrong angle? Because I'm barely getting the outlines of people's faces. And I think it's worth looking into, does she use a slight diffusing filter?
It would be probably important then to look into the director of photography.
Yeah.
And we haven't been paying attention to that sort of thing, so is it the same person? Is it consistent?
Well, do you think the podcast would tolerate a little bit of me looking that up?
Yeah, because I can edit out the silences.
Well, you could just hum some elevator music.
Or I can just blather on. Because I thought with the black, like, it's interesting, Kirsten Dunst's character by the end, because she's the one who sort of brings in a bit of colour in the first fancy dinner. In the blue dress, and she's shown a little bit of shoulder, and then in the later one, the one where the rest of them have all conspired with the mushrooms, she's wearing a white dress, but notably it's laced with black hems and things.
The details with costuming.
Really incredible costuming.
These films are making me pay attention to what people are wearing. For about the first time.
And food is such a thing. I mean, I haven't seen, neither of us have seen Phantom Threads, but a lot of, there's been a lot of talk about the costumes being really constricting because Daniel Day-Lewis's character is making them so constricting, and he's not moving with the times. That's set in the 1950s in London. But that film is punctuated with food and fancy breakfasts and eating, and the Beguiled, there's dinners are a focal point of it, and the clothes are, you can see the constriction of the corsets, but the dresses themselves aren't necessarily constricting enough, but not to the point of they can't do anything. Like they're very mobile, they're very rough and ready girls, and women.
On director of photography, two different directors of photography. Lost in Translation was Lance Accord, and The Beguiled was Philippe Lessor. But we must see whether any of these she works with repeatedly.
But I was noticing with that one, very careful framing, because with Lost in Translation it felt very loose, and there was a sort of documentary feel a lot of the time. And the framing, I think it probably is precise, but it's filmed as if it's loose, if that makes sense. Whereas The Beguiled, it's so tight, it's so organised, there's very clear frames where you can see the golden row.
And I was thinking, in that very last shot, with McBurney's body outside the gates, and the 7 women, all quite outdoor dressed up, way off in the background, well past the gates.
They're back in their threshold space of the domestic/school space.
And the camera's slowly moving inwards, and they're not moving at all by the time that shot starts.
It's like a tableau. They're posing at that point. It feels very much like a painting, but they're caged. I mean, that's their prison. They have a prison sentence now because they've killed this guy. But yet they're in that they're in the shape of the golden row, that spiral shape. They're positioned in that spiral shape within the frame. They're dead centre of the frame. But they're imprisoned, and I should have paid more attention, like what year is it and how many years, because it said something like is it 3 years in to the Civil War, so is there at least 2 more years to go?
Did it say 1864?
I think so.
Okay, Wikipedia.
My American Civil War history isn't brilliant. We don't really learn about that over here.
I learned a little bit of it from playing North and South, the video game, when I was a teenager.
But there's still a while to go, isn't there? So, I mean, they were imprisoned there anyway, and initially it's for their safety, but now they have this terrible guilt, and there's such a big deal made of their Christianity.
Yeah, that was incessant. We are Christians. Would it be the Christian thing to do? Would you join us for prayers? And then again and again and again. And almost every single time it was religious observance with some sort of undercurrent making a mockery of it.
Yeah.
So there's Miss Farnsworth saying, will you join us for prayers, as a way of starting to broach a bit of a social life with McBurney. And then the I need to pee bit, of course, which was classic. So 1864, American Civil War ended in 1865. So the South is losing by this point. I think the turning point is Gettysburg, isn't it?
But I think on their Christianity, I wonder if it's worth thinking about the Adam and Eve story, because there's that thing of original sin coming from Eve, but really it's she has a go at something, she presents it to Adam. Adam thinks, oh yeah, that sounds good. He makes a decision for himself. He consents to having a go himself, and all hell breaks loose. And I think the women in Coppola's Beguiled, and I haven't seen the first version of the film.
It's a remake, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's one of those ones where it's a readaptation rather than it's going back to the source novel and reinterpreting it rather than remaking the first film.
Yeah.
And I think there's a whole other issue there of the whitewashing, because they would have had slaves, they would have had at least servants who were black helping them, and I think that's, as far as I'm aware, that's in the first film, and there's no trace of that here. And I've heard people try and make the argument that that's the point, is that they're erased, but that's a whole other problem.
Well, I think historically, there was that bit where Amy said all of the slaves have left. And I think historically this is the point where the Emancipation Proclamation has been issued by the North. And if the South is beginning to lose the war and populations of slaves are becoming aware of this, it's feasible that they would have just left.
And that's why all the girls are doing everything themselves. They're doing hard labour, and you can see, when they're trying to sort of hoe or whatever in the garden, they're really struggling.
There was quite a lot of conscious decisions never to actually show you hoes in contact with Earth.
Yeah.
It was lots of, that's going to be just out at the bottom of the shot.
It's all in the sound, yeah.
And, so I think Coppola characteristic number 5 is giving a lot of responsibility to off-screen sound to create meaning. And so I suppose McBurney saying, you need someone to take care of your garden, essentially volunteering to be a gardener, was him realising that the amount of labour that a plantation like this, just not even its fields, but just the main house of a plantation like that needs masses of upkeep, particularly when you're in an environment where everything grows all year round.
There's also that just maybe it's a very British thing, but the innuendo of, oh hey girls, you need your gardens tended to. He can take care of that as well. He's man enough for all 7 of them.
Well, that fits with the Garden of Eden thing as well, I suppose.
He's up for it.
He's aware that there's disorder, but he makes the mistake of thinking that he's the thing that is needed to sort out that disorder. Whereas what is needed seems to be that the whole place just needs to be burnt to the ground. And it seems to be the kind of implicit insistence, because this is a slightly nightmarish environment.
It is.
And that thing of having Amy initially, in the very first few shots, having Amy picking mushrooms and then bring them back with McBurney and saying, pick some mushrooms, I don't know whether they're poisonous or not.
Yes, exactly.
And then it having to be established, we can eat those ones, but we can't eat those. And then Farnsworth later on going, so we're going to kill him, so Amy, don't do what you did before. And we had exactly the same framings as we had in the first few minutes, as Amy's collecting mushrooms that are poisonous this time. So this is a lethal landscape.
And he gets bitten by a mosquito at one point.
It's quite,
his body is just under constant attack. His body takes a huge amount of punishment. It sees a lot of violence. Sort of before and during the film. Yeah,
those shots of his leg, both when he's been, it seems that it's not that he's been shot, it's that he's been hit by bits of shrapnel, I suppose, at the beginning. And then the shot when he's broken his leg, it's like his leg burst, rather than it being, because, if you break a bone, perhaps it might jut out through your skin, but it looked like his leg had been wrecked completely by the act of falling down the stairs. So his body, it was being attacked by the environment, including the house.
Yeah.
In fact, in almost every single one of those shots when we saw the door of the room he was being kept in from the outside, it was framed so that we could see those stairs in the back, as if those stairs were sitting there, just gently menacing him, going, I'm going to fuck you up later. Shot durations, endless, of course.
It's
that
nice.
Seems to be a couple of things.
Yeah, but I really like that, because I like being able to study the image, and she gives you that time to be that pensive spectator, to just watch and explore the image for yourself. So they're very precise framings, but they're framed and the focus is so that you can really wander around and pick up the details. It felt very tableau-like. I think you mentioned when we were watching it that it was pictorial. It was as if it was photographic from that era.
Well, the reason that it came to mind is because I've had a little bit of experience of seeing photographs from before about 1920. And one of the most common characteristics of these photographs, and it might be to do with the fact that the images have aged and they wouldn't have actually looked like that when they were first printed, is that they have quite a silvery sheen to them. Although that's probably just one process because there were several processes. And the other is apparently quite a big thing in the 1860s in both the UK and the US, was pictorial photography, specifically to mean a form of photography where you take lots of photographs, and then you'd manipulate the negatives by trimming little bits from several negatives and compositing them together into a new negative and then printing a positive from that. And it was a way of having things that were really close to the image and things that were quite distant from the image both in focus at the same time, for example. And so you could actually make a picture out of a photograph, and that was a thing already in the 1860s. And the photographs, they have this slightly unnatural look to them, of course, because too much is in focus. There are slightly misty areas where one part of the image joins the next part of the image, and they look too neat because it's all so highly contrived. There's lots of details being packed into an image like a painting. And so it's pictorial in that specific sense of being, it's like pictorialist photography, and it's like photography in the sense of having that sheen. And I do wonder, maybe what we're looking at here is one of those things where a director has form, and Coppola's form is relatively little movement of her subject and highly contrived compositions and long shot durations and a mistiness to everything. That fits really well with 19th century photography. And so maybe this was just the kind of film which she was going to be drawn to making at some point, because she's already doing some of the things which copying 19th century photography would entail doing. And so this might be one of those places where those particular aspects of her signature have just become quite intense because they're quite well suited to the subject matter. It would be interesting to see whether the shot durations in this were longer than her average for her previous films, for example. Whether the contrast was lower than it generally is for her other films, because it did seem to be. It was actually slightly annoying at points. But in a way that, not in a way that where I went, I'm going to start watching this film now. In a way where I went, this is edgy.
Well, it's very
stuff.
difficult to see, just the sizing. But then it was probably a kind of realism because everything was candlelit.
We're sitting in a room right now which is candlelit, right?
Yeah,
and it's not got enough light in it.
Yeah.
But these environments, even when they had 10, 15 candles in, still didn't have enough light in them. So I think she might have been slightly cheating on that. Well, not cheating in the kind of reprehensible sense, but cheating in the sense of making it so that all of these images were darkened either through the way the film's developed or through digital post-production.
But if they're on the losing side of it and they're on the side of history that's dying off, they're running out of resources, their light is dimming, they're coming to the end. A lot of the candles were really quite stubby, they were burnt down, so even those kinds of details were important. This is a way of life that's dying. This is the big house that's going to die off. I kept thinking every time I saw those columns, I kept thinking of A Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche Dubois describing, her past and her youth growing up in a house like that, and she's at the very end of it, and that's obviously quite a bit later. It's about 80 years later, but still it's the beginning of the end of that way of life.
Right, this is a subject that needs a lot of attention, I think, in discussing this film, because there is a lengthy history of representations of the American South, specifically in film, to the extent that I've seldom been listened to on this before, but to the extent that I, in the past, have argued that in addition to having a genre called the Western, we ought also to recognise that in American cinema there is a genre called the Southern. And it's not one which, of course, commonly has that name, but it has as big a repertoire of iconography as the Western does. So the Western has costumes, and it has environments, and it has story arcs, and it has props, all of which are specific to the Western. And the Southern has exactly the same thing. So that's why I was getting all kind of, Spanish moss in the first 2 or 3 seconds of this film.
Yeah.
They're really showing us that this environment has its own flora. The accents, they came and went slightly at a certain few points, and they seem to be points where people were going, wow, Colin talks a bit different from the way that we talk. They were getting kind of dragged over to talking a little bit like he did, but most of the time Southern accents with that kind of floaty Blanche Dubois means what words kind of intonation, those were really intense. The highly contrived life, the being really polite to each other, the columned mansion, the frisson of violence underneath the surface, and the sense of gothic proximity of harm and death. These are all really southern things, as in they're specific to the genre. They're not necessarily, of course, actually descriptive of what it's like to live in the American South. They've become the conventions of the genre.
I think there's a lot to be said in those contexts of the homosocial life of these women and how that's violently disrupted by the introduction of this man. And then he himself isn't American, he's an Irish immigrant who's probably been fleeing, well, it's in 1860s, but there's probably still in Ireland a drag on of the effects of the famine 20 years before. There's still mass immigration because there's no prospects in this island. That's also a colony of Britain. So it's interesting then, it's fascinating then that he goes to America, ends up in New York, and then he's almost immediately joining the Yankees.
He kind of mumbled this because that's how Colin Farrell talks. But he said, I took $300 to take a man's place. So presumably a long-standing citizen of New York who had been drafted, and he just accepted a fee to join the army.
So he had nothing, he was desperate, so he took the money.
So there was a sense of, we are never going to leave the environment of this little plantation mansion. This huge plantation mansion. And one of the things that will be suggested by the narrative point of view, never leaving it, is that it's cloying, it's this trap. And of course having someone who's crossed the Atlantic, trying to find himself
new
better
life. But has wandered into a civil war.
So it goes from one poisonous environment, across the Atlantic, goes into a conflict zone, and then within that conflict zone gets pulled into another poisonous environment.
Which in a way is probably even more poison. Well, it's literally more poisonous for him, but it's even more violent than the one. And I mean, it's fascinating in light of recent things that 2017 you've got this movie and you've got this group of women who in their own individual ways contrive to make this man their own. They're all jealous of each other that he is giving them attention. It's all being offered to him on a plate and he's taking it. He consents to certain things. He's nice to them. He charms them. There's probably subtle levels of manipulation on his part, but they're very small, and it's more he appeals to them. He appeals to their confidence. You know, he tells Kirsten Dunst's character, you just haven't got the confidence to go out there and do something else, you know, that, and he's trying to give her that. And it's hard to know when he's being genuine and when he's just being charming, because he's in survival mode and you don't know to what extent is he surviving and to what extent is he preying on these women. And then things kick off and he's got several invitations from the three oldest of the women and girls in this place, and he goes for the easiest one, it seems. There's a lot of ambiguity around that, but you know, she's the first one basically who approaches him. She kisses him while he's asleep, so that's not a consensual act. You know, she has invited him through just taking it, and he goes to her room and presumably she has let him in, and it looks like the glimpse that you get looks consensual, and then she writes it off as non-consensual after the violent thing has happened. You know, after I keep forgetting the names, but after Kirsten Dunst throws him down the stairs.
Okay, so Nicole Kidman's character was called Martha Fair or something?
It's Farnsworth, I think.
Farnsworth, yeah. She's just down as Miss Martha.
Miss Martha.
Okay, so Martha, that was Nicole Kidman's character. Kirsten Dunst was called Edwina. And Elle Fanning's character was called Alicia. And then the younger ones, Amy, we know, with a lot of dark hair. Jane was the one who played music and was just annoyed all the time. Marie was the one with quite a round face with short dark hair. And then Emily was the one who basically never said anything. And that, we've got to pause, I think, and just discuss this for a moment. That's basically the entire cast of this film.
Pretty much.
You've got Colin Farrell, Nicole Kidman, Kirsten Dunst, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5 girls, the oldest and tallest of which is Elle Fanning's character, Alicia. And then you've got on the cast list as it was listed in the credits, just 2 more guys, who was including the Confederate captain who gave Martha those bullets, and then the 2 Confederate soldiers who came in the house, who we couldn't even see their faces, but they're named as well. And then of course there would have been a bunch of other extras, but they just don't get credited, poor fellas, right?
But because they were just sort of a procession moving before the gates, really.
So there was maybe this is something I pointed out before we started recording. It's that Coppola seems to be big on everyone does something wrong to a smaller or greater extent. Everyone does something wrong, or at least the main female character and the main male character do something wrong, and so nobody is completely free of guilt. But the fact that one or two people may have a small degree of guilt for having made mistakes doesn't mean that they deserve what then happens to them. So I think there was an element of the film wanting us to go, oh, maybe they shouldn't have done that thing with the mushrooms, because actually he seems to have apologised for having gone so off the rails, and he of course had just lost his leg, and so maybe that's all understandable. So maybe he doesn't need to die as far as
it's a difficult one, because he does threaten to kill them, but then to what extent is Miss Martha culpable, because she asks for the bullets? They wouldn't have firearms if it weren't for her. And that is a really hot topic at the moment, because there's been yet another horrible school shooting in the United States very recently. So it's bringing in, but she's got an empty gun but no bullets, but she asks the soldier who stops for bullets because she feels safer with them. And the whole thing this week has been Trump suggesting that teachers be armed in schools. So it's a very odd thing to watch at the moment, actually, in the light of that just having happened. It's a very odd foreshadowing of that, because she actually in a way brings the danger into the house, because he wouldn't have a gun. The gun was there, but he wouldn't have something to shoot them with. He's basically helpless once his leg's gone, because the thing is, he's lost his leg, but his arms are occupied by the crutches. There's only so much violence he can really do, and let's face it, he's angry. He makes the threat, but it's words. Would he actually really do it? But that's a question that's hanging over them all, and that's their fear, that's their anxiety that drives them. They're the ones who actually killed someone. We don't know if he's ever killed someone. He's seen, from what we know of him, he's seen the battlefields and he's run away. That shrapnel is in sort of the back of his leg. He was running away from the violence. So this is a man who comes across as not inherently violent. So he complicates the notion of the abusive man, because to what extent is he really the abuser? Is he the one who's the beguiled? Has he been beguiled by all the women? So you have to have a very difficult conversation. So it's a really interesting film to come out at the moment, and it came out before the Weinstein stuff all kicked off. So it's a very prescient moment to be having those conversations, is how culpable are women, because victim blaming is a massive problem. And then this film asks the very awkward question, is who's the victim, and to what extent is anyone a victim? Are we all victims to a point, and then where's the tipping point into becoming a perpetrator of abuse of any kind? When he's lashing out and making threats, and he's understandably very angry. He was unconscious. How can he know that his leg couldn't be saved? This is not someone who is medically trained. She's just working off an anatomy book. What if he's right, that she made moves with him and he didn't reciprocate, and so she immobilizes him? It sort of poses all those very difficult questions.
I found myself kind of pinging back and forth on this, as Coppola intends. But then there was the moment where I was motivated to go, right, no matter what may have made McBurney a victim, he does deserve to be violently stopped now, was the sex scene between him and Edwina.
Yes, it's really aggressive. It's really, it looks like she's in pain, but there's something sadomasochistic about it, because she looks also like she's enjoying the pain, but it's very hard to tell. She's making faces that are very ambiguous. It's one of those things where if you walk in on something and you get just this flash of an image, it's very hard to tell whether that's pleasure or pain.
And the way he was interacting with her is the kind of thing where, when you're going to do a scene like that, you need to be sitting down with the main creative people on the film and having a really big, in-depth discussion about just what exactly you're supposed to be doing, and then do it in tiny little bits. And it did seem to have been broken up into something like 2 or 3 second shots, relatively rare, brief shot duration. And then you and the person you're going to be doing it with sit and do lots of
workshopping
really
and
careful, really labour-intensive testing through of how you're going to do it. Because that was 2 actors of quite long standing who've done lots and lots of films, really trusting each other. And that bit where like he had his hand on her face and he was kind of tipping her head back.
Yeah.
He's quite a powerful guy, and she didn't seem to be resisting that at all.
No, that's
So
the thing.
you have to really trust someone if you're going to do that kind of
They
stuff.
probably built that up. And I would say, I mean, Colin Farrell is well versed in this as well. He's done that kind of violent sex scene that's consensual, but it's verging on violence before.
What was that in?
Well, it was in a film that I mentioned during watching that it's an Irish film called Triage.
Oh, yeah.
And he played a journalist who has PTSD from being out in, I think it was Iraq, covering the Iraq War. And the film kind of slowly unravels. It's really fragmented because you're aligned with him a lot of the time, but he's been away for months and he's back, and he has an aggressive sexual encounter with his wife, and it's really powerfully done. But again, it's someone who's been through serious trauma and working through it. And then again in the Beguiled, this is someone who's been through serious trauma and is trying to work through it, but has found himself in this bizarre situation where he's convalescing, but he's also a prisoner. I mean, that house is a prison. The columns have become prison bars. Even the very pretty refined mesh curtains and things, embroidered net curtains and things, they're gauze-like, they're prison-like. You're looking out from these barred windows almost.
Just to camp out on the gun thing, I think it's one of those issues that's so fraught in US society. If you're going to take a stand on it in a film, you need to do so virtually invisibly. And I think that was a really good go at doing that, where you had a situation where there was clearly a gun in the house, and then our main character goes and makes a decision that means that gun is now a usable weapon, and then as a result of that, it's used against them. And because I think we probably would agree that nothing should be done in the US to put more guns into the hands of anyone, and that there's much to be said for disarming the police.
And it's interesting how he uses it on the chandelier. He uses it to get frustration out. I mean, it's kind of part of the house crashing down, really. It's the beginning of the end again.
That chandelier shot was a little bit of a cliche in that there's so many films in which somebody shoots something holding something else up. So in which somebody shoots with enough precision to sever a rope. Now, there's no way he would have been able to...
He's not trained.
hit the chain at the top of a chandelier. But it was just one of those suspension of disbelief moments where, yes, if you shoot the roof where a chandelier is attached to it, the chandelier will fall down. And
But yeah, it's more the image and the sound. I think, that was something to add to that really quite violent sex scene is, I think a lot of it's actually done with the sound. It's the thudding, the tearing, the images are so quick. The sound is really doing the heavy lifting of telling that particular narrative. But with the chandelier as well, it's that crashing. It's that symbolism of the big house crashing down, the symbols of wealth and privilege crashing down around them. It's not just that they're under siege, it's that world is crashing down around them. That's frightening.
there's something in Southerns, because I'm going to call them this from now on, which seems to be this requirement to just ever so slightly lament the loss of the pre-war American South, as a way of saying it was right for it to go because it included slavery, but the way that it went involved such conflict within US society that the fractures are still visible, and that is something which should have been handled better, because that gesture of implicitly saying that is a way of saying, these internal conflicts that actually make the US several nations, those conflicts are ones that we wish had never come about in the first place, because they're all just the product of unfortunate misunderstandings. So part of that is that these little attempts to try to redeem aspects of the American South. Now, the film did actually seem to be relatively neutral on the incessant mentions of Christianity, but given that all these motifs about imprisonment did seem to be one of the elements of the thing that was imprisoning these women.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of many things. It's the costumes, it's the hair, even. I mean, the way their hair is done up and how long everything takes, like the preparation and having to help each other while hating each other and being resentful of each other. Every aspect of this life imprisons them. They're locked in for safety, but they're not safe from each other, and it's the jealousy between them all that really is the root of the problems. And it seems like there's hints of it already, because I think very early on, before John John arrives before Amy brings him back. Elle Fanning's character, Alicia, she's sort of falling asleep during the French lesson.
Yeah.
She's fed up. There's one of the girls, is it the musical one? She's already saying, oh, well, I just have to say, and my father's soldiers will come and pick me up. There's already tension there. He just catalysts it. His presence even, I mean, he's perfectly affable, he's grateful, he's very well behaved, and he's not asking for anything. All he asks for is, can I wash? Can I shave? Just basic human rights. And he does that quite meekly. And maybe he's manipulative in being so nice to them, but he has no reason not to be, because they're keeping him alive. He'd have died without them. So he is very grateful, whether how much of it's genuine or not. He's performing gratitude. And is it them who take it too far because they're so hungry for anything else to be happening? They're so bored. All of them are so fed up with this life of drudgery, particularly because it's not just the lessons. If all the slaves are gone, they're doing the hard labour of the estate on top of their lessons. So this is not a nice life for these young women.
I've been wondering, knowing next to nothing about Coppola's output and now recently learning about it, one thing I did know about it was that she devotes a lot of attention to experiences specific to girlhood. And it would be easy to go, oh, this is a really pro-girl, a really pro-female community kind of filmmaker. And yet, to be pro, let's just represent girlhood, does not in any way mean that you're pro-female community. Because one of this film's messages seems to be, it's absurd that women and men are basically segregated from each other in this culture, because what it means is that in instances when men and women do come into contact, the tension is so great that people just instantly fall into bed with each other, and then that leads to suffering, rather than it being a matter of these are just other people and it's completely fine to be around them. So that did seem to be one of the film's messages. It seemed to be this being an all-female environment is harmful to these women.
Yeah, well, I think it's the matter of choice, isn't it? Because it's, if you choose to be in an all-woman grouping, that's different. Whereas this is none of their choice. None of them have made the choice for this to be their lives, and they've become imprisoned because they have nowhere else to go. They're the only ones left. There's just these 5 students left because they've nowhere else to go. Their teacher is there because her hands are tied. While there's pupils there, she can't go anywhere.
And we had so many of these shots of them looking out into the outside world, and they could see fires off in the distance. At one point they could hear a battle happening off in the distance, and it was clearly, given what they saw when they looked out and there was actually people out there, given that it was always soldiers, it seemed to be very clearly coding the outside world as male and the domestic inside space as female. And I suppose the thing that led to that led to suffering was that a male was brought into the all-female space. So I suppose just that very simple structure could have been saying, when all female spaces are constituted, a drastic and radical breaking of that structure is only going to lead to pain and conflict, as if the film was just saying it ought to have been a more gradual process.
They are very much tied. The only time they seem to leave the grounds is that brief moment where they deposit the body and then they immediately are back in the gates. Amy is the only one who gets sort of anywhere close to the outside world. I couldn't tell if that forest was part of the estate or she was going beyond.
Maybe that was deliberate, in that it seemed that these women were the landscape that they were having to interact with. It was the landscape that immediately surrounded the house inside the wall of the property, as well as the landscape that was outside it as well. And so it was a porous environment already. And those first few shots where Amy brings McBurney back, and you can see that there's already plants that are growing up the columns. The outside world is encroaching on the house.
Yeah.
It's already starting
enveloping it. It's reclaiming it.
And these are people who don't seem to have realised.
They've been in there so long, and nature's coming to them, and nature being both the plant life but also the male coming in, being brought in.
So the fact that they then use nature to get rid of him, it changes the significance of nature, because early on it's the thing that they're forced to try to keep out, but then later on it's the thing they have mastery of that permits them to actually resist this encroachment.
But again, it's the Adam and Eve and apple thing. It's the forbidden fruit. It's the mushrooms you shouldn't eat. I don't know if it's almost a Snow White reversal as well, where it's the poisoned thing from nature that ends it all, puts him to sleep forever, brings a kind of peace to the house, and yet you imagine turmoil because they have to live with that then, and they're sort of framed in their prison in the final shot. They're outside but they're inside. They're framed in gates and columns. They're barred in even though they're outside. They're arranged. There's something about all of that. He consents to eating it. He wants to eat them because he's allowed to believe that they're safe. So he consents to eating them. They're offered to him as if they'll be something pleasurable for him, and he has form because he keeps taking the pleasurable things that are offered to him, the nourishing things that are offered to him, he takes.
And there's so many shots of him drinking alcohol. So, well, I suppose if it's got Garden of Eden allusions in it, one of the Garden of Eden messages is that women are not to be trusted.
It's probably coming from that traditional reading of the Garden of Eden, of the virgin whore dichotomy, which the older of these women and girls exhibit, is that tension between the two, and it's not really about him. He's just a catalyst for those baser instincts, and they aren't allowed to have both. They're not allowed to have something in between. They have to have battle. So it's a different kind of civil war. It's a different kind of internal war that's going on in these women. So there's this war raging outside for legitimacy, for property, for nation, for identity on a national scale, but inside it's identity of I'm a good Christian, but I really want to fuck somebody, I'm a good Christian and I'm a good woman, but I have desires, I have baser instincts. And I mean, it's one of the youngest kids, one of the youngest girls who actually has the idea of killing him. She's the one with murderous intent and implies it, and then the matriarch of this family unit of girls and women runs with it, and they get Amy to do their bidding. So this is Amy, who is a life giver. She is the one who saves the animals. He is her latest animal that she saves, and she even getting soldier and looking after him. It reminds me very much of Anna in The Spirit of the Beehive, because she does something very similar where she feeds an enemy soldier who is injured and taking refuge. She looks after him. Then it diverges, but there's just something about the girl child being nurturer, and then the girl child as nurturer being turned by outside forces into something else, into a potential death carrier. She's kind of weaponized in a way. They weaponize her.
Could it be then that the relevance of the Garden of Eden allusion is that this is a story that deliberately alludes to an earlier story in order to show how different it is from that earlier story, because this is one in which the subject of the story is the character who's the villain in the first one, in the earlier one, so in the biblical Garden of Eden story. So this goes, let's just dwell a moment on what it's like to actually be that person in this particular environment, in a kind of going back and rewriting it from the girl's point of view spirit.
But that's the thing, because she's made out to be the villain, but she's as much a victim as anybody in that original story. It's just she's victim blamed. I mean, that's where it comes from. But it's overlooked that Adam consents. He unwittingly consents to something that's detrimental to him, and she doesn't realise that it's detrimental to both of them. She's innocent. She thinks she's doing the right thing. Amy thinks she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's doing the right thing when she saves him. She thinks she's doing the right thing when she's told to go and collect the mushrooms that will kill him. So this is a child who has been weaponized. She's the sort of interesting reversal of Eve and Snow White possibly as well, in a way.
Well, if Amy is an Eve-ish character, then there's corresponding other characters, and it was the snake in the garden that told Eve to do it.
Is it just me, or did you hear rattlesnake noises in the soundtrack? Because maybe I thought I heard rattlesnake noise.
Some of that soundtrack was just a single rather hissy note held for about
It might have been
14, 15 seconds.
but it certainly evoked rattlesnakes for me.
Right, so what do you think the implicit meaning was, that Miss Martha was supposed to be quite a sneaky character then?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a bit of it in all of them. That's the thing. It's sort of split across all of them. It's like you were saying, there's no one clear-cut character. They've all got motivations that are ambiguous. I think Amy is sort of, I think she's the closest to a victim in the film, because she seems to genuinely want to just help everybody all the time, and she's the one who gets attacked for doing good things. She's the one who gets sent out on all the journeys. She's the one who gets sent out to do the blue rag, and he catches her, and of course, I mean, it's just like, you know, she's only just out there and he's right there. How could she not notice him? But it's deliberately contrived, it felt. That she's the one who, she's genuinely just trying to help everybody and do the right thing and keep everybody as safe and healthy as possible, and she keeps getting punished for it, and she has to live with this thereafter.
He briefly became a supernatural,
Yeah,
slightly horror villain at that point, because he was just suddenly there. And there was that moment where he chased Amy into that barn, and Miss Martha went and tried to help her, and there was some time when they were already in that barn before she got there, and I was thinking, I was girding myself for what we were about to see, because
me too.
I figured this film will go there.
I thought that as well, actually. I thought we were going to see her feet hanging, or because you kept hearing her screaming. I thought, God, that child's getting... But then he seemed to genuinely be hurt, because he had told her, you're my best friend out of everybody here. You've been looking after me and I appreciate you. You know, it seemed like he was genuinely hurt and angry that his friend betrayed him. It's really hard to tell if he is genuine or it's part of a manipulation. It's part of him beguiling them. But that's the ambiguity of the title, is we don't know who the Beguiled is. Is it one of them? Is it all of them?
And having a character reversal as drastic as his, where he's nice, he's polite, he's a bit horny, but doesn't seem to be actually trying to force anyone to do anything they don't want to do, and then suddenly he wakes up after having lost his leg and he's now the villain. He's switched to being a villain, and that's partly reflected in the makeup of making his face look so pale after the amputation. That was some impressive stuff. I do wonder, Coppola seems to resist using digital tools that others are jumping on. Do you think she still films in cinefilm?
I don't know, actually. It would be interesting to know.
Because the fact that used so much black, it would suggest that it was still filmed in cinefilm, because cinefilm, I gather, even now, cinefilm is just slightly better than digital cameras for registering differences between different shades of black and grey. And that digital cameras are actually better than cinefilm for registering differences between ever so slightly different shades of white. So I think, you know, if you're going to do something which has lots of different blacks and greys in it, use cinefilm. But one thing that did seem to have been done digitally with this was at certain points taking out
his leg,
one of his legs.
Yeah. There's parts where he's walking away from the camera, and it's feasible that they could have used an amputee body double for that.
There's the whole book to be written on amputee body doubles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's a small population of people who can do these acting jobs. I remember listening to actor commentaries for Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. They use loads of amputee actors for that. Like the guy in the wedding groom.
Yeah.
And in the shop.
Yeah, but this is a guy who...
He's got an arm off.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a guy who had lost his... he'd lost his arm in a biking accident, and so had to, for the film, had to be made up basically looking as he did on the worst day of his life.
Yeah.
There was one shot when they were coming out of the barn. I thought, that's not Colin Farrell's body shape. I think that's probably a body double. And of course, there was also shots where you couldn't see his face, so it seemed to be like an the shoulder shot of him looking down at his stump.
Yeah.
So feasible. Although I didn't see that any such person mentioned in the credits.
Yeah.
Maybe you just don't get credited even for that.
Well, it's probably falls under background actor work. It's minutes worth of film, probably. I would say, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that she's the sort of director who would prefer in-camera effects rather than anything CGI, and it felt very real. It felt very visceral a lot of the time, like you were saying, you know, and when they're stitching his leg, you're wincing with the pain of it, you know, really, I mean, a lot of the budget has gone on that leg setup.
So
again, sound effects for
yeah,
the squelchy noises.
This is the thing. Coppola is known for visual aspects of what she does, but sound design seems to be just as significant.
I think the sound designer and the editor, I think I noticed the same editor on Lost in Translation and The Beguiled. So I think they deserve quite a bit of credit as well, because the sound in The Beguiled is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the editing is, but I think because there's such an emphasis on the cinematography when there are cuts, because they're fewer and further between than we've become accustomed to these days, it's maybe not as noticeable, but it's exquisite work. It's really beautifully done. And then the parts where it becomes slightly frenetic, like the really aggressive sex scene, it ramps up. My heart rate rose. I kind of felt, gosh, that must be sore. I felt a kind of affect from it. It was effective.
So little research jobs we must do. Let's wrap this up with stuff we have to look into a bit more. Number of sounds which are off-screen sounds. We could actually do a count of how many sounds are on-screen and how many off-screen.
How the space is extended by the sound.
Yeah. How many shots, how much screen time is occupied by that group of 7 women all sitting still, all 7 of them in the frame, in some sort of group composition?
Yeah, there's a really interesting one, I think, after the dinner, and you can barely see Colin Farrell's face behind them.
Because they're all wearing quite shiny
They're all
clothes, aren't
quite bright, and the pastels come out for probably the first time, because they usually all wear kind of shades of white and cream before then, but then it's that first dinner where a couple of them are wearing pastel coloured dresses, but he's barely perceptible. You can just about see his face in the candlelight behind them.
It had a supernatural feel to it for quite a few reasons.
It felt ghostly a lot of the time.
And one of them was that these women, the most they had by way of contact with the outside world was occasionally having some actual humans breeze by, and Edwina referring to her father in Richmond. And it was something which had the whiff of, she's mistaken, he's probably dead about it. Whereas everyone else had just lost everyone, and so they were all set adrift from society in general.
That was the thing. It's verging on horror at times. I mean, there were times when I was wondering, is he or are they some sort of supernatural entity? Because the thing is that most of those girls and women are wearing white most of the time, so they're ghostly. And Amy, I think, is the only one who wears any colour consistently. She wears a kind of stripy dress with sort of red in it and stuff. She's the only one with consistent colour. And then Edwina, towards the end, after her sort of transgression with John, it's the white and the black and the shoulders showing. She's basically wearing her sexuality, but is still ghostly. Even still, there is something supernatural about the house, and they're imprisoned in it like ghosts, nearly like they're haunting it.
They would be none the wiser if they'd just been flicked forward in time 100 years.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
They don't leave the property. They just occasionally see a few things off in the horizon, which are really vague.
They're fairly self-sufficient as well, because they're living off the land, even though it's brutal and they have to be careful. It could kill them at any time, but they're living off it.
And they're also living off a huge wine cellar.
Yeah.
It seemed, because there was just booze all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm big on doing counts of how many shots are there in the film and what percentage of those shots contain appreciable camera movement. For example. And it's not that Coppola always locks off the camera, because that's a Kubrick thing, isn't it? That's what Kubrick's known for, is always locking off the camera. But camera movement seems to be very restricted.
It's restrained, but it's there, but it's restrained. You notice the difference between Lost in Translation, where things were kind of floaty and loose and meandering and wandering without any real focus. But here it's focused, it's purposed, it's considered, it's precise, it's restrained, it's pared back, it's there.
These are the characteristics of what we would call narrators, aren't they? That there's a slightly winsome narrator in Lost in Translation, and the narrator in this is slightly prowling and a bit menacing.
That final shot I found it fairly disturbing, actually. That very slow, and I was trying to work out, I think it was definitely a forward dolly, but I was wondering, is this on a crane, because it seems quite high up, or is it a very high dolly, just very slowly moving in? I couldn't perceive any kind of zoom happening along with the dolly. I think it was just... and then I was wondering what kind of lens is it? Is it a long lens or short lens? Because how much is in focus at the moment? Because there was just something about how the sides were encroaching. It just felt like it was collapsing in. It was tightening on them. You have his body, you have the body, and they very carefully sewn him up, and that slowly creeps out of the frame, but they're still trapped both within the gates, and you've got the blue flag, the blue rag hanging off that you tied onto the gate, as well, marking him as an enemy body, and that's in frame. They're trapped in the gates. The camera doesn't go inside again. It films them from outside the estate, but they're also within the columns, and they're stuck to that house. And they're not moving. They're posed there. They're not moving.
And they've all got hats on as well, I think, or at least Martha did. Yeah, I suppose then the film might be going, you all had the opportunity to stop being prisoners here, and all it needed was for you to just open your minds to this war being silly, and maybe you could all just have left with them. But you didn't, and it all went wrong. Here's how negative things are going to be from now on, making the film a kind of roughly 85-minute hiatus between their initial imprisonment and their eventual imprisonment.
Well, that's the thing, because they were imprisoned before, but now how can they face anyone in the outside world given what they've done? There's men all around them dying in this awful war, and who knows if their own soldiers will even get back to them or not, because they're losing. They have their own survival to think about. They may never pass back there again. They may be trapped there forever with that corpse outside the gate, trapping them in, really.
That's the thing. They seem to be quite confident, even though they know that the South are losing the war, they seem to be quite confident that Confederate troops will be passing by sometime soon, and that if the film was to keep happening, when Coppola does one of her now seemingly quite routine, we're just going to flick forward a few hours, we're going to flick forward a few hours, we're going to flick forward a day, one of these jumps forward, they seem reasonably confident that it'll just be gone the next time the camera flicks forward in time. By ending then, the film does seem to go, no, we're not going to do that anymore. It's going to be them staring at that forever. It was finely crafted throughout. And I listened to the whole of that Sofia Coppola in conversation with Bill Murray thing after Lost in Translation.
Oh, right.
And she gets like 5 words in. He does lots of just recalling what everyone did during the shoot, and she says a handful of things. She praises her hair and makeup people, and that's it.
Yeah, I wonder, she's a behind the camera person, and he's an old sage of an actor at that point, performer and an agent, so he's going to talk about it, because she has a name that's sellable, but that's her second film, and his name is very sellable. People will go and watch that film purely for him. They won't have heard of anybody else involved in it. When that came out, they'll go to Bill Murray. And he started to do quite a few indies around that time, because he just could. Because he started to work with Wes Anderson, and he did Broken Flowers as well, which was quite a forgettable film. But he was doing lots of different indies and more unusual films. He was very game.
Stars-wise, this had more stars than Lost in Translation did. Coppola's got higher credibility in the industry, clearly.
She's earned it at this point.
But I do wonder, is this one of those examples of having 3 major stars in your film bringing back catalogues?
I would say 4, because Elle Fanning's well known as well,
okay.
So I would say 4.
So let's say you've got four major stars in your film, and are these people bringing back catalogues with them, which are mixing in colours to the whole meaning repertoire of the film, which aren't welcome? Because that point where I said...
You mentioned Far and Away.
This is almost exactly what Nicole Kidman had to do in Far and Away.
Which should only be consigned to the dustbin of film history. It's an awful film. It's the Irish accents make me angry.
Oh, Christ, no.
It's terrible. No, don't. It's terrible.
Right, so she's got quite a witchy look in this film, and I was going, is that from previous roles she's played that have been quite witchy?
Wasn't she a witch with Sandra Bullock was her sister? What was that film when there were witches? They were sisters? Can't even remember.
And also, Nicole Kidman is seemingly one of those people who just gets thinner and thinner as she gets older.
And she's quite tall, very thin. She's got that tall elegance, but it really suited that school marmish thing.
Colin Farrell, it took a while to believe that he was actually going villainy, because he's usually such a comic Irishman.
Not really. I mean, I think he's got quite a range.
I suppose in the films that I've seen him in.
Yeah, no, I think he's got quite a range because in Saving Mr. Banks, he becomes quite a violent alcoholic. And he's Australian. Is he an Irish immigrant in Australia? I can't even remember. But he's Australian, I think. I'm pretty sure he's got an Australian accent. Emma Thompson plays... She wrote Mary Poppins.
For some reason, I keep thinking PZ something, but...
yeah, it's and she used her initials.
So was she the husband who she'd left actually ages before she even started?
No, he was her father in Australia. She took on an RP accent. A lot of people didn't realise she was Australian.
P.L. Travers.
P.L. Travers, that's it. He was her father in her flashbacks to her childhood in Australia. And Mr. Banks in Mary Poppins is based on him because the whole premise of Saving Mr. Banks, the film, is exploring how she was... Because it's about the adaptation by Disney. Colin Farrell, he's that sympathetic figure because he clearly really loves his daughter and she idolises him, but he's an alcoholic. He messes everything up. The family is destitute because of him because he keeps losing his job because he keeps drinking and messing everything up in the bank he's working at and drinks himself to oblivion, dies young, that sort of thing. And he plays that wonderfully. He's full of joy with the child and you're seeing the flashbacks from the child's point of view, but you're getting glimpses of the adult world through the eyes of the child, and as an adult you can read what's going on, that actually he's the deadbeat. He's built these fantasy worlds for his children, but it's his real life's in utter shambles and he's ruined the lives of his wife and children.
If you're going to make The Beguiled, would you have cast your 4 main characters using stars?
It's not really something I've thought about because it's never going to happen, but...
So you're going to make exactly that script, you're right in Sofia Coppola's shoes. Now you have sufficient standing to get 4 stars to play your 4 main characters.
Well, it depends on the stars because these are actors who very quickly... For me, they became their characters. Somebody like Kirsten Dunst has been the girl, and now is a fully fledged woman in her films. This is someone who has worked with Lars von Trier. She's a very mature actress, and she became a mature actress at a young age, in a similar way to Scarlett Johansson. But I would say Kirsten Dunst has matured much more in terms of her roles. She's played very serious roles in big characters.
They were all 4 of them were well cast, for sure. Yeah, and I suppose there's logistical limitations in that. Can you get funding from this studio if you haven't got stars on your each part of your package? And usually the answer is no.
And it's a kind of nice ensemble because then you've got these up and coming young child actors as well, and you're carrying heavy stuff and doing it very well because that wee one with the round face, Mary, is it the character? Yeah. And the way she suggests about the mushrooms. And she has this wide-eyed look of innocence, and then Nicole Kidman reciprocates that, and there's just unspoken understanding between them all arising.
The actress who plays Marie is called Addison Reich, I think it's probably pronounced. Born in 2004. Well, that's interesting. She's played herself in 24 things.
What? Home movies? She's impressive because she was doing some serious eye acting in that scene, which should not go unnoticed. Really fantastic cast. So it had that gravitas, but the older, more experienced actors did not overshadow. They became their characters, they became absorbed in their characters. I wasn't looking at Kirsten Dunst or Nicole Kidman, I was looking at Edwina and Miss Marsh.
Who does Elle Fanning really quite strongly resemble, apart from Dakota Fanning?
Sometimes I see images of her and I think I have to do a double take because it puts me in mind of Carey Mulligan. I don't know if that's who you're thinking of,
yeah,
but
that was it, yeah.
There's something about her nose, I think, is similar.
They've got the same kind of hanging mouth. Mouth kind of hangs down at the edges, makes them look worried. I once, for a mate, when I was doing my A-levels, he was at a local art college. I wanted to make a short film about a bunch of guys. It was basically inspired by Reservoir Dogs. I wanted to make a short film about a bunch of guys who were trying to hide from the cops for a bit after a bank robbery had gone wrong, and one of them had been shot, and they were just shouting at each other in a basement. It was awfully done. We were encouraged to do loads of improvising, and it was all kind of just spent all night up, getting all raw and angry at each other. And what we did is we just got into the atmosphere of the scene we were supposed to be doing. And I think when you're doing something which has so much atmosphere, it must be so important to go, right, we've now finished doing that 2 hours of filming. We are now going to play tag. We're going to go and do something which is completely different from what we've just been acting, just for everyone's well-being, so that we don't end up all getting polluted by the angst of the characters we've been playing, because everyone will just end up in conflict with each other. And particularly when there's kids involved, you don't want kids to be going, I did that film that time and it was 6 weeks of just utter hell because we were all so into our characters. You want them to be going, it was 6 weeks of professional acting with moments of intensity followed by moments of deliberate rest and difference.
Well, if you find our discussion of the Beguiled interesting or useful, please share it and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss any of our episodes. They're going to be in different formats. We're going to try lots of different things out. Sometimes there'll be these kinds of post-screening discussions. Sometimes it'll be just me on my own talking through a particular issue or outlining some research, that kind of thing. And I'm really keen to get guests on. So if you're interested in being involved in that way, if you've got something different that you're working on, if you want to get your research out there, please give me a shout. This is a platform for you as well. Many thanks to those of you who already subscribe or who already share and who are already getting involved in some way with helping out with these projects that I'm trying to do. The podcast is free and I work freelance. If you can help financially with a regular payment to patreon.com/PEA Blair, that would be hugely appreciated. Payments are in US dollars, and at the moment the exchange rate with the British pound is roughly 70 pence to the dollar, so it should cost you no more than £1.50 a month if you pledge $2, for example. If you can spare it, that would be amazing, and if loads of people gave me a little bit, that would be amazing. Just even sharing this is a big help as well. What I'm trying to do is make arts and humanities education accessible to people. I hope that this would supplement lifelong learning in the institutional sense, but also provide platforms for people to get their work out there, get their research out there, and to break the canons, to break the dominance of a particular set of people in the areas that we all study, and open the playing field out a bit more to everybody else. Those are the sort of main objectives of what I'm doing. For now, thank you so much, and I hope to catch you in really soon.